you could tell someone immigration's not going to be the reason you can't build your company, it could be many other reasons your company doesn't succeed. Immigration's not going to be that. Light bulbs go on and the opportunities that open up are beyond what we can imagine, right? So it's all about just giving brilliant people the opportunity.
Hello, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, a podcast that brings to light the incredible stories of those who left the familiarity of home for new horizons. I'm your host, Pratik Panda, always curious and eager to share these journeys of courage and determination. Today, we are delighted to have Nitin Pachisia join our podcast, a perfect example of the values and spirit we cherish. Now, Nitin's journey has been interesting from India to the US, and it's more than just a geographical transition. It's a testament to his resilience and entrepreneurial spirit. Growing up in a one room house in India, he moved to the US in 2005 to start his own company, navigating the challenges of immigration and the startup ecosystem. As the founder of Unshackled Ventures, Nitin supports immigrant founders by providing financial backing. But more often than not, you would have heard me say that there is more to a VC than just money. And Unshackled brings a lot of essential services like immigration, securing visas, helping you with credit cards, and so many other things that you have to deal with as you move to a new country as an immigrant, especially as a founder. Nitin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great to meet you.
All right, let's get started right off the bat. Tell us a little bit about your journey. You've had humble backgrounds back in India. What encouraged you to move to the US?
You're right. You've done your research. I grew up in Delhi in a family where the earliest memories are of being poor, but also optimism. And a lot of that optimism came from my dad started a small business. And, with that effort and the results, it was every day better than the previous day. So much that at some point he could afford to get me to private school. We became homeowners at one point. A lot changed in our life just in my first 20 years of living. And all of that was in Delhi. Once I finished my undergrad, and I also did chartered accountancy, the CPA equivalent, which I never intended to practice accounting, but it was what everyone in my family who studied had to do. I looked for a job that would make me travel because I was really curious about what I don't know about the world. And that opportunity came through with ABB, which is a heavy engineering company like Siemens. So I was there for 3 years, still wasn't really decided that I'm moving anywhere. It was more exploration. And the next stop in that exploration was with Deloitte. That's how I came to the US for the first time. I'm very fortunate that I landed in Silicon Valley, which instantaneously felt like this is where I would want to be. A lot of my personal values really aligned with the values that the Silicon Valley ecosystem, the diversity in the people, the access to opportunity, the openness to try things. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's a learning experience. That was very unique that I had not experienced anywhere else in the world. And so that kind of became the reason to stay. So yeah, it was an unplanned move, just being open to exploration and discovery. And when it felt like home, made that bet.
That's amazing. And it's that the feeling of home is important, especially as you leave your homeland and move to a new country. And you've been here almost 20 years now. As a founder today who's planning to move to the US, what do you think has changed in these last 20 years? If you can recollect what you had to go through and what the situation like it was in 2005
Yeah.
versus what it is for a lot of founders that you are backing now, what do you think has changed?
I wouldn't claim to know everything that someone moving today is going through, right? So things are changing really fast. And I talked to some people who moved to the US in, say, 70s or 80s. And that immigration experience was very different compared to what I went through in the early 2000s. And so I'm very sure that today's challenges and advantages are different. One of the advantages I see is connecting to people, access to communities is much easier because of how virtual digital communities have grown. And so I think that's a huge advantage today versus, kind of go roll back 10, 15 years. Your network started with the school you came to or the company you came to work at. That was the seeding of your network. However, and then when you decided to, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur, you could go to meetups, you could physically go to certain places, which obviously was a disadvantage if you're not in the Bay Area or New York City. Today, that disadvantage kind of levels out a little bit. You could be in Madison, Wisconsin, and you could be part of a community with founders who are based in Silicon Valley in New York. And yes, it's not the same experience, it's not the same velocity, but you're benefiting from connecting with people such that when you want to go visit San Francisco or New York, you have people. And so I think it's become a little bit easier for entrepreneurs who want to take that initiative to do that. But I'm also very sure there's some new challenges that come with that, which I am not the best person to talk to because the environment in which I made that move was different.
So, what was the idea behind starting Unshackled Ventures?
To be honest, it was an idea that I was sharing with VCs that I was pitching my company to. So I joined a startup after Deloitte and then came across an idea with a couple of friends that we were moonlighting. And our internal agreement was when we have three paying customers, that would be the proof of there's velocity, there's something here, there's legs to this idea, and then we should go full time. So when I hit that point is when attorneys told me you can't do it. You're on H-1B. Somebody needs to be your sponsor. And so the VCs who were interested in investing in us, I was asking them to do what we now do at Unshackled. But the consistent answer was, we're not structured to do that. And in my brain, it's not that difficult, right? Employment has existed for a long time. Employment-based sponsorship for immigration has existed for a long time. I'm not asking anyone to invent anything, but I try to understand a little bit more. I could understand, okay, funds have their operating systems and operating structures. And if they were to start doing this, there's some back office that needs to be developed. There's some processes that need to be developed. And so the personal experience of being at a visa, trying to start a company, facing the friction and knowing what that solution could be, but nobody's willing to implement it became the reason to implement it. Right. And so I'm very candid with when talking to our LPs, for example, I'm like, I didn't invent anything. Employment existed, immigration existed, investing existed. I just put them all together and then assembled a team that could execute on that better than anybody else. And the first person on that was my business partner, Manan. He and I had worked together. His parents came to the US in the 70s, and I get to hear from them the experience of what it was like moving here in the 70s. But Manan, even though he's a naturalized US born citizen, he had a co-founder who was on an H-1B. So he went through the same slowdown and the same frictions that I did. So when I shared with him the concept, he was really energized by it. And in that process, I couldn't think of a better person to complement me, both in terms of skill sets and analytical frameworks. And so that's how the team came together. So I think the impetus was really just how big of a problem this is. And if solved, what could it do? Right. You look at the talent that's trapped into big companies or academia, just waiting for their green cards, because that's a big unlock. If you could give them the confidence, and Pratik, you were sharing your story with me, if you could tell someone immigration's not going to be the reason you can't build your company, it could be many other reasons your company doesn't succeed. Immigration's not going to be that. Light bulbs go on, and the opportunities that open up are beyond what we can imagine, right? So it's all about just giving brilliant people the opportunity, and that was enough of an incentive to drop the idea of building software companies and instead shift to building this services company. And I can't tell you how good of a decision that was.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is truly amazing. And I want to add some context here for all the listeners because we have so many people who probably don't even understand why this is a challenge. And it's only if you've really been through this, you truly understand the pain. And I can go on for hours and days talking about this because it affects your personal life also so much that it becomes hard to plan it. It becomes hard to figure out how you want to do things while also figuring out, okay, yeah, you want to start a company and you want to build and grow the company, right? At the back of your mind, you're always thinking about a lot of these things as well. And what I like is your mission that says like immigration is not going to be the reason why you feel that, hey, I can't do this. Because if I go back to my journey, one of the biggest reasons I moved away from my startup was I struggled to get a visa with my startup back in 2017. It was a lot harder. We didn't have as much traction to show. There was not a playbook for getting a variety of these visas, which is better defined today, I think. But that was one of the reasons for me to now it was like I have to go find an employer. Otherwise, I'm out of status and I have to move back.
Yeah.
And by that time, I had my partner here, and like we couldn't afford to just uproot ourselves. So that's been, the core thesis of all this. What do you hear from the founders that you are backing? And one of the things that I keep telling very frequently also, like in my early days as a founder, like when I started my first company, I was in my 20s. I was really giving the most importance to which VC writes the biggest check.
Hmm.
Over time, I have learned that money is a commodity and there are a lot of people who can give you money, but there is a lot more that you need from a VC, a good VC. And you talked about immigration. Is there something else that you are working with your founders as they come assimilate in a new world?
Like I would ask you what you think is the one thing a VC could offer that would want you to work with them.
I think if you are a relatively early career founder, which means that you've not been in the industry too long, you don't have as many connects. I think the biggest value add is getting access to a network or an ecosystem. Because when I go back right now, I think I'm in a much more privileged situation where I know a few people who know many people
Sure.
and who would, do me the favor that, hey, yeah, we'll make the introduction. But when I moved here in 2017, I knew nobody, like literally nobody. And that was the toughest thing, right? Like, how do you even start?
Let me follow that through. What does access give you?
More opportunity to grow your business faster is, I think, what you get with the access. It
I
gives
think
you,
I think if you're building a great company, though, you would reach most of the investors that we would introduce you to yourself to. You have the hustle, you're building a great company, assemble a great team, you're executing, you'll reach who you need to reach. But what that access or those introductions give you is time, saved you time.
yeah,
In my opinion, as a founder and now as an investor who's also a founder of his firm, the one thing that is irreplaceable by anything is founder sign. So to me, any VC's purpose of being on a cap table should be amplifying founders' time.
yeah,
There are many ways to do it. It's not any one specific service. Different people will do it in different ways. Sometimes their brand is so large that their name being on your cap table makes you the magnet and it saves you a lot of time, which otherwise you would spend reaching to people, which now they are reaching out to you. And other times it's really solving for things that you would do yourself, but you don't have to as a founder. Immigration is one of those things. When we started, most operating firms or VCs that were started by operator turned VCs focused a lot on recruiting because that used to take a lot of founders' time. There were firms that were specializing in design, business development, corporate development. There's these functions that companies and founders have to do at different stages, but VCs could augment that effort and therefore save people time, right? So our philosophy coming from that founder mindset has been whatever we do should amplify our portfolio founders' time. Obviously, our starting point was immigration. And the way immigration amplifies a founder's time is either you don't have to become an expert and go through learning about immigration and trying to find an attorney and then figuring out what the structure of your company needs to be, who needs to be the sponsor, the board. And I've heard things like changing equity structures and founders will give away their own equity in their company. All that BS effectively, you don't have to spend your time on if you have a partner who you can rely on and trust that they know what they're doing and they will take care of immigration. The other way it amplifies time is a lot of people just wait. I'm working at Apple. I'm going to wait here until I have my green card. When I get my green card is when I'm going to move. And that's time that is never going to come back. So we take a lot of pride and put a lot of thought in how will we amplify the time of people we're working. And every company we invest in has one foreign born founder, right? So now we start looking at starting point is immigration. What else does that particular journey of being born somewhere else and then coming to US entail? And it really came down to access being a very important part of it. So that was the next thing that we focused on was simplifying or making it faster to get access to the people who you want access to. Investors is one group, customers, talent that you need to hire. It's effectively access to people who will make it easier for you to move faster, right? Investors are part of that pool. And so we started building a really large network and now it's become a community. And the third piece there is the transfer of knowledge. The fastest founders are very curious, great learners. The more you can accelerate transfer of knowledge to them, the faster they will learn and grow. And so this is where we started building this community, which we made public earlier in the year, which is not just for our portfolio founders, but goes beyond. So now, today, if you look at what we do, it's a combination of immigration, um, community, and capital. And those three things, and capital as friends and family capital, right? Because that's the other part of the learning is we all moved as adults or young adults, and we left our friends and family back home. So there is no friends and family capital access for most immigrants who come to the US for school or work. And so the combination of those three things is what all of our efforts stay focused on.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for explaining that so deeply. Let me ask you this, and I have a little bit of a selfish interest there as well. You raised your first fund was 5 million, the second fund was 25.
20.
How do you go 20? Okay. So how do you go from not having any VC background or experience
Yeah.
to raising your first fund?
I think our first fund was purely story. Like literally, you're absolutely right. And I was reminiscing about this. I was once on a bus with 20 other VCs who were all much larger funds than ours and much more accomplished. And I was looking around and I was asking myself, why am I on this bus? I don't belong on this bus. And I think that imposter syndrome still shows up at some point, but it's reduced a lot because now I know we have product market fit. What we're doing, nobody else can do better than what we do. And but that wasn't the case when we started our first fund. However, that fundraise wasn't that difficult. We plan to raise 3.5 million as a proof of concept. We can invest in 15 companies and prove that this model can work. And we started with people we knew, people we'd worked for. Startup that both Manan and I met at. We went to the founder, some of our VPs. Manan's dad had been an angel investor for 20 years. He refused to invest in Manan's company and wanted to invest in my company because his co-founder wasn't full time. But we started with a small group of people who knew what we can do, how we can execute, and then just pursued the networks from there. Included in that were some cold emails to, for example, Brad Feld, who we knew is passionate about solving immigration. He really believes in the power of immigration to maintain the American advantage. And so a cold email to him worked. And then he opened his network. So we just kept pursuing the network of people who were believing in us. And as we started proving that, I think going to the second fund of 20 million, we started thinking about, okay, now we need more than just early believers. We should start thinking about some institutions. And that journey continued with our third fund, where 73% of the capital came from institutions. So there's been maturity in the capital base. But to your question of how, it's just hustle and storytelling. And Manan and I laugh at some of our decks from 2014 and 15 on how ugly and stupid they are. But that's what existed then. And that's what made people believe in us, which is no different from how most startups go, right? Like most founders will look back at their decks from 5 years ago and have a laugh at them. But that's all we had was story. We had no track record. But I think the story of who we could unlock was the point where our LPs or investors met us. If you can really unlock people who have ambition, talent, and they could now join the entrepreneurial pie and they could be building companies, these are people we want to invest in as well. So why don't, yeah, you enable them and then we'll come downstream and invest in.
Talking about story, you invest in fairly early stage companies, even idea stage companies.
Yep.
Are you really betting at that point on that story?
We're not investing in companies, to be honest, and we're not investing in the story of a company or a product. We're investing in the story of a founder. And we prefer investing pre-product, pre-revenue. Inception stage is a phrase that's being used. And this is the point at which we think we can add the most value, because when a founder has done customer discovery, has found the conviction that they should now dedicate years of their life into this, and we can come in and enable, take away that immigration pain point, enable them, bring them into a community and make it faster to do the rest of the 0 to 1 step, is where we find ourselves to be most valuable to founders. So we like to stay focused there in that swim lane. And I also personally think that's a stage where we can focus entirely on the person and not have to deal with, oh, you have 2 customers or 2 pilots, and what are they saying? Seed investors do that work really well on how they take those early signals to extrapolate what it could be. Our focus really stays on, Pratik, what's your distance travel? Like, tell me your life story. And I just had, every day I have these conversations with founders and the rest of our team. And we just learned so much about founders, for where they were born, the crazy steps they've taken in their life to get to where they are today. Because where they are today wasn't on the cards for around their birth conditions, right? And so learning those, the effort, the grit, the decision making, judgment, risk taking, curiosity, resourcefulness of how they've used what little they had to get to where they are. It's amazingly informative. And that's what gives us the confidence that this person's not going to settle for something small. They're going to keep swinging and they're going to go for home runs. Whether it's the first company, second, third, fourth, we don't know, first idea or fifth idea. Um, the idea is, let's just enable the person. If they are a high upside person with high opportunity cost, high ambition, it's worth working with them and it'll be a lot of fun. And most of the companies are doing something very different from what they started with, right? What they were pitching. But we don't get caught up in the idea. We actually like to learn, okay, why this idea? Why do you think this is the best use of your time? And it informs us a lot more on their way of thinking.
That's amazing. And how do you go about doing these founder discoveries, right? When something doesn't exist, people don't talk about it, of course, which means finding that kind of talent is like looking for a diamond in the rough. Typically, founders come to you, or are you doing some kind of scouting as well?
It's both. The effort we put in is to get as close to founders as we possibly can. When I come to Charlottesville, I take that opportunity to meet with founders in UVA, who UVA has 8% international student enrollment. And so whatever I can do, I will make my steps. And everyone on the team operates the same way, is wherever we go, we know immigrants are everywhere. And the ecosystems or the magnets for the community are schools and employers. So we make the effort of not just where we go, but also intentionally going to places where we can meet founders. And so the idea is not to go look for, are you raising right now? The idea is to go meet people, tell them, inform them of what we do, give them the pathway, because the narrative of you're on a visa, you can't start a company, is that misinformation is so far spread that that's our biggest enemy. So the idea of going out and meeting folks is to address, you can. That part is BS. And if I were to tell you today that your visa is not going to stop you, what would you start doing? And then 3 months from now, that same person comes back with, I met you at this event and you told me I can do it. And I started doing customer discovery and now I have something. Or it could be 3 years later, right? But but that's what energizes us, is that you can actually see it in the eyes. Like when, for example, I was at Syracuse a month ago, it was a small group, 13, 15 people, but you could just see the eyes light up when you tell them you're on F1. Great. Half our portfolio came to the US on F1. And we invested in many founders before they had even graduated. You can do it. Um, so the goal is go where people are. And the community, one big part of creating the community has been the reservoir of relationships. So we, over the 10 years, we've met thousands of founders. I know my limitation. I cannot keep up with many thousands of relationships. But the community becomes a really nice way of bringing people together, not just close to me, but close to each other. So our team is pretty small, the six of us. There's no way we can keep up with 20,000 founders. But in the community, it's self-serving. Founders are collaborating with each other, ideating, providing feedback to each other, opening doors and sharing knowledge that they have. One person might be an expert at pricing, another is an expert at coding, and they're coming together on, okay, you're building this SaaS product and trying to do price discovery. Here's how you can go about doing it. That magic is happening in the community. I think over time, we will see more and more people wanting to be in this community that then leads to teams forming and raising money, selling to people within the community. I think if we do this right, the community becomes a fully functioning ecosystem of its own.
Yeah, I think having that community is super helpful, especially because it gives you a lot of confidence that if somebody else has done it, you can do it too.
Mm.
Even though you know it, a lot of times you need that sort of revalidation, so to say. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you something a little more personal. I think it comes from, I would say, Asian backgrounds, where irrespective of how or what interesting work we do, there's always a challenge to make your parents know that you do something meaningful. And it's hard for them to understand. And I read your story somewhere where your dad asked you, like, how do you make money? Or when do you even make money?
Mhm.
And I remember my first startup days, and my dad really just thought I waste my entire day in front of a computer, don't make any money, which I mean, it was some part of it is true that I didn't make much money back then. But for me, the reality in their eyes shifted when the first time I appeared on Times of India, which is like a leading newspaper in India, and then eventually appeared on TV. And a lot of times I tell other founders that if you struggle to get validation from a parent, like whether you have a PR strategy or not, show up on a few articles and then they think that, oh, yeah, our kid is doing something meaningful because they're on TV or they're in the press. How is that for you? I know you talked a little bit in one of your articles that your dad didn't really understand what you
Yeah.
do, and you want to still make them feel that you do something meaningful.
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating part of it's such a fascinating layer, right? Most of the people we work with are very cerebral. They're deep thinkers, they're technologists, but they all have this kind of hidden need to impress their parents, right? And that comes from, all of it comes from a place of love, I think. Like parents care about us so much because I remember like growing up, my dad did not want me to run his small business because he thought I'm smart, I can study, I can get degrees. And therefore his thought process was, you can run this business, but this is not going to give you a great lifestyle. Get your degrees and you can get a great lifestyle. And I think it's the same. The reason I didn't tell my parents for years that I had left my job and started a company was because out of care, they would be really worried, right? I'm in a new country. How am I paying my bills? And I think as a parent, at least my parents, it doesn't matter how old I am and how mature I am and how, like, from when I was 15, I was taking care of the family and stuff. I'm still their child. And I feel that affinity with a lot of the founders where we're all like that. Or a lot of our parents really think that they need to take care of us. And for me, it was more just getting to a point of sustainability. And then I could tell them, look, okay, I took this step, but don't worry, I'll be able to take care of myself. The family's going to be fine. We're okay. But the validation point is funny. Like when we raised our first fund, we were in many papers in the US, in India, whatever. That made zero impact on my parents. Like, so I was like, okay, I guess they're just tough to impress. Being in a paper isn't anything. Then we raised our next fund and we were in the Fortune magazine. It was some special issue. That didn't impress my parents, or Forbes magazine. That wasn't that impressive. But the NASDAQ thing, the Times Square presence was impressive. So I guess you just can't tell what kind of validation is important, but it all comes from a place of care. And I think this is the fun of the kind of relationships that we have is we can all appreciate with m- a lot of us immigrants, right? So I'm in my 40s now. Most of my peers who are in the 40s will have parents that are in 70s and they're in the home country. Um, how do we take care of them, right? What can we do? They're aging, their medical needs, someone to take care of them. And we've built great lives here, but I'm not a citizen yet, so I cannot sponsor them and bring them here. Also, they don't want to be in the US. They have lived their entire life in India. They don't want to leave that circle. And that's common across a lot of the immigrants. So that affinity of the common things that we're going through. I don't want to call them challenges. We all made a conscious decision that we're going to leave our country and move here. They're not challenges, they're just conditions of our existence now, but they're common across many people. And this community helps give us room to share our fears and concerns. And also, if someone has solved for it, I can now learn from their experience, and to the extent it's relevant to where my parents are and their condition, I can use those resources as well. I'm really excited about the community and what it can do because of the unique conditions that being an immigrant brings on our lives are only we will know. I don't think my kids will know what this is. They will have their own set of concerns and their own set of challenges that they will overcome. Ours are just different.
Yep, I think that's spot on. Nitin, one last question before I let you go. If you had the opportunity to have lunch or dinner with somebody that you've been looking forward to, who would that person be and why?
If I could, I would love to have a meal with President Barack and his wife Michelle Obama together. I think their story is so phenomenal, and they're from everything I've read are amazing people. But the reason I want to meet them together is because I want to hear both the experience of President Obama going through his life and becoming president as a very young president, and his wife's experience as the spouse of someone who is now the leader of the free world, because she has a very different background and has been very clear she's no political ambitions. And yeah, it's a really great combination. That's definitely top of mind. So if you can get this in front of the Obamas, I would be grateful.
Definitely. Okay, we'll root for you to make it to that meal with both of them. And I'm also extremely inspired by their journey. So I will root for you to make it. Thank you so much, Nitin, for spending time with us. You've shared a lot of very helpful information, encouraging for a lot of immigrant founders who are working on ideas, but there's some inhibition stopping them.
Yeah,
I
look,
think,
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity because I want to get in front of as many immigrants as possible. And if I can be a little bit of help in paving the way, there's a part of my calendar that's open where anyone can schedule time. The link is on my LinkedIn and Twitter. I will do anything possible to remove the friction of immigration if that's what's standing between you and starting your company. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
that's amazing, Nitin. And I truly feel like because I've been through that pain and I still live through that pain, I just want you to know that you're doing amazing work,
Thank you.
just encouraging enough people to not have to worry about a piece of paper that determines whether they can do something big or not.
Yeah.
So I think it's an amazing thing. I don't think everybody understands the gravity of that problem. Even though it feels like just another piece of paper, it is a big mental block. stopping people.
Yeah.
So I think you're doing an amazing work. And thank you so much for sharing your journey.
I appreciate you.
All right, thanks, Nitin. And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy, challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.